Well, good afternoon, everybody. I thank you for being here and joining us for the Kayak Conference, the Kentucky Young Adult and Children staff that work in public libraries. This is an annual conference that we offer, and it's an opportunity to network, think of new partnerships, to learn about things that you've never heard of before, to hone your experiences, and to deepen that which you already know. I thank you all for being here right now. We have a great session ahead of us. With us are both Dr. Chloe Simpson and MJ Mark Gonzalez. They are both from Cal Poly Tech in Pomona in California. And they're coming to speak to us about different ways that we could use 3D printing to empower our youth and basically patrons in general. But this is definitely specifically going to focus on youth and ways we can foster inclusivity and wellness overall. Dr. Chloe Simpson is an assistant professor of adaptive physical ed, and she's also a co-director of the Motor Development Clinic at Cal Poly, again in Pomona. She just really looks at ways to prepare physical educators in kinesiology, there we go, professionals to students of all abilities. And so she's just going to come here and help us learn ways that we in the library can help our patrons better. And she's asked MJ to co-present with her. And MJ has graduated from Cal Poly with his bachelor's, and he's currently getting his master's degree. And that's in adapted physical education. He's a fitness department supervisor at Cal Poly Pomona in their Bronco Recreation and Intramural Complex. And he also teaches a variety of different martial arts as a group fitness instructor. Both of them just have been working on basically what we're going to hear about for some time now. And we're just really lucky to have them with us. I think there's just a whole bunch of information that we are going to hear that's going to be both new and give us new rabbit trails to go down in order to just really improve the services that we're offering to our patrons. So I just did a very short blip of a bio. Their bios are pretty expansive, and you can read about more of them in the presenter paperwork that I sent to you all. And I'm going to turn the mic over both to Chloe and MJ so they can just get the most important information out there rather than y'all listening to me. So thank you both, Chloe and MJ, for being here. And please, as you're listening, feel free to put questions in the chat, or you can even rob the mic. And both Chloe and MJ said they were open to that form of communication as well. So thank you, Chloe. Thank you, MJ, for being here.
Thank you so much, Amy. Can you hear me all right?
Just great. Thank you.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. Yeah, so I received an email from Amy asking to come present to librarians, and I thought to myself, what on earth, as a person who prepares adapted physical educators, can I offer to you all? And she was interested in my interest in 3D printing. So I'm really excited to share this with you. And thanks so much, Amy, for having us here. So like Amy said, we're here to talk about fostering inclusivity and wellness and empowering youth through 3D printing. All right, did the slide change okay?
Everything's going well, thanks.
Excellent, just want to make sure. So like Amy said, my name is Chloe Simpson. I am an assistant professor of adapted physical education at Cal Poly Pomona. What a Polytechnic Institute is it means we are a learn by doing institution. So everything we teach our students, they do, which lends to my position as the co-director of the Motor Development Clinic, where children and adults with disabilities from the greater Pomona area come in to learn motor skills from our future kinesiology professionals. I do want to let you know that both MJ and I are 3D printer hobbyists, not necessarily experts. So we're here to share our passion and our interests, and we might not know all of the nitty-gritty little details about 3D printing, more so from the hobbyist angle. I was introduced to 3D printing at Oregon State University, where I did my master's, and a fellow lab had a 3D printer, and the lab advisor did not have students who were interested in the 3D printer. So I was like, let me get my hands on this. I'm so excited. And that's where I started kind of being introduced to the cost effectiveness. And I saw that it was a cost cutting way to be able to make assistive technology. So you can see on the right, the adapted bike pedal is one of my absolute favorite prints. And I'll share a story later that explains why. One of my other favorite prints is a Braille zoo book, which I think is a really cool way to allow all abilities to access reading. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to MJ, who's going to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. Am I coming through okay?
Yeah, you sound good.
Awesome. So, hi, my name's Mark Gonzalez. In the Kinesiology department, everyone just calls me MJ. It's my preferred nickname. I'm a current master's student at Cal Poly Pomona in adapted physical education. I work as a group fitness instructor and a fitness supervisor at the Bronco Recreation Center at Cal Poly. My current career path is to work as an adapted physical educator. So my introduction to 3D printing is actually a little interesting. I have a big hobbyist obsession with board games, so I collect a whole lot of board games, and with that comes a mess when it comes to organization with all the little parts that come with it. So when I was collecting my board games, I was figuring there has to be a better way to organize all this. So I got into 3D printing because I wanted to organize all my board games a lot better. So that was the reason why I got into it. After I ran out of board games to organize, however, I started 3D printing other stuff, and a lot of it for me was fidget toys, and I actually have a few of them with me right now. It's my favorite thing to print.
Awesome. Thanks, MJ. All right, so today we're going to go over the foundations of 3D printing, the basics of what is 3D printing. I understand that you all are librarians, which means you might have exposure to 3D printing. So I do apologize if this is redundant, but in the case this is new to anyone, we wanted to make sure that we covered the basics before we applied it. And then we're going to get into talking about opportunities for accessible design and ways you could involve youth in engaging them in considering ways to accessibly design toys and assistive devices for their peers or their classmates or, their family members. So we're really excited to share this with you, and we want to learn a little bit about you all. So we were hoping in the chat you would take the time to put your name, the library you work at, and if your library has a 3D printer or not. You can add the bonus if you personally have a 3D printer, you could share that as well. So go ahead and in the chat, address those 3 prompts. Hi, Gregory. No 3D printer. All right, you're going to be borrowing Angela's from Russell County. Hi, Ashley. Welcome. Yes, we have a 3D printer. Kayla, looks like you have some friends in the chat you'll be able to borrow some 3D printers from. We do, but it's still in the box. All right, Megan, we got to unpack that. Julie has a 3D printer. Tori has 2 3D printers. Sarah has a 3D printer. Olivia has multiple. Welcome, Melissa. Glad to hear you have one. Karen has one as well. John has several. Okay, I am seeing all sorts of opportunities for you all to network with each other if you do not have a 3D printer. With a Sonic pad and clipper at home. Very cool, Brian. 5 in our new creative space. Kate, I'm really excited to hear that. And Jennifer has 1. Okay, so my guests who did not, Kayla and Gregory, I hope you can connect with all of these people who can maybe lend you some of their 3D printing equipment or print some things for you. Thank you all for sharing. I'm so happy you're here. So we'll go ahead and move forward. MJ is now going to talk about the fundamentals of 3D printing. So I will hand it over to MJ.
Cool. Thank you, Dr. Coy. So you might be wondering, why should you decide to 3D print? Well, a lot of it has to do, the main point of it for me especially was the cost-cutting aspect of it. A lot of stuff that you could find on Amazon tends to be a lot cheaper if you just print it, because filament costs about 20 bucks on average. if you were to print this, it comes out to pennies for some items. So what's important about it is to understand that there's such thing as an open source community. These are files that are uploaded to online libraries where there's no cost or paywall to access these files. Now, it's important to know that not all these websites are completely open source. Some of them will charge to see the file, but there's plenty of them that'll give it for free. And these items are shared within the community. And these communities, they involve a whole lot of customization. Like when you have these files, you could make them bigger. You could decide to use different color filaments. You could change the color of an item. It also goes in line with a whole lot of user input, because when you print these files, you have the ability to change the size of the item. So if you print it, it turns out to be too small or too large, whatever it may be. As soon as you print it and you have a need for it to be modified, you could just change that on the fly and make it better for your next print. The accessibility of a software can be assessed on a computer, so you don't have to build the items yourself. You really just need the file and it's there for you, and you could just go straight to printing it. Now, a lot of it has to do with it being fun. Like when I first 3D printed my files, you get kind of this like energetic buzz out of the first successful print that you get. And a lot of it for me was, you know what, I'm just going to go down a rabbit hole and start printing all this board game stuff and fidget toy stuff. So it's a lot of fun to start to get into. But what exactly is 3D printing? If you want to define it, it is something called additive manufacturing. That's a process where you lay down and bond a large number of successive thin layers of material. So for example, if I took a tube of toothpaste and I drew out a square with that toothpaste, and right on top of it, I drew out another square, and right on top of that, I draw another and another. That is something called layering. So it's just a whole lot of layers of material that just build vertically upwards. You would wonder, what do you use for doing all these 3D printing? And a lot of the common ones happen to be thermoplastics. So thermoplastics is a plastic that has to be melted, and when it's melted, it will solidify when it cools back down. So a lot of this stuff is commonly used for 3D printing, which is PLA, PETG, and ABS. What's interesting is a lot of newer technology can do something like 3D bioprinting of living tissues, which is used to reconstruct human tissues. So this can actually be applied to stuff like bone, skin, muscle tissue. Definitely check it out sometime. There's a lot of YouTube videos on this stuff. You even have wood and metal 3D printing. There's even one video where they're 3D printing a house from concrete. Okay, another example of 3D printing something is this adapted bike pedal. I'm actually going to hand this back over to Dr. Chloe. She has a personal story to share about this.
Yeah, so like I talked about at Oregon State, I was introduced to 3D printing when a fellow lab advisor got one through a grant. And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, when my dad experienced a stroke when I was in my undergrad, this would have really come in handy for all of these niche items I was looking for. And so for my dad, one of his main goals was to be able to move around and his mobility. So we would walk in the pool on a regular basis for him to be able to rehabilitate to get to walking. And the other thing was this recumbent tadpole tricycle that I adapted for him. And so with having one hand and one leg that was still functional with his hemiplegia, it was important that his foot was able to be strapped into the bike. And so I looked all over for bike pedals, and I found this Sunlight Universal Adaptive Pedal. And in my mind, I remember it being like $150, but maybe it was $70. Right now on the internet, it says it's $70. And for my little undergraduate budget, being a lifeguard, it felt like so much money to be able to make a bike that would work for my dad. And so then when I got into 3D printing, I was like, I wonder what assistive technology exists. And I found this bike pedal. And I found it by searching occupational therapy on Thingiverse, which is a website that MJ will talk about. And I could print this for under $5. Truly, it's under $1. And I can scale it to all different sizes. I can create different densities for its strength. And so for me, for someone who works with individuals with disabilities and has this huge personal connection, it's so important to me to be able to access technologies like this that can save money and kind of work against what I consider a disability tax, because niche markets often raise their prices when there's a smaller customer base or they're different type of equipment. So you can even see here, the first one is a child's foot pedal, $95 for this plastic foot pedal. And we're sorry, this product is unavailable for purchase. And the adult size one, that one is also out of stock. So not only is it hard to access this equipment because of the cost, but there's also a limited availability, and oftentimes assistive technology is just not available. So I feel that 3D printing is a really great way to be able to move around that barrier within society.
Thanks for sharing that, Dr. Coy. So let's go over the anatomy of what makes up a 3D printer. So first is the material that we talked about earlier, which is the filament. This is printing material that typically comes wound on a spool. If you look on the right-hand side of that picture, that is the filament, most likely PLA. Now, for it to melt, it has to go through a hot end. So if you look in the middle of the picture, there's a hot, and we do mean really hot, component that kind of melts the material so you could start layering it to create your 3D printed item. But for it to go through the hot end, it's going to need an extruder. So an extruder is just a part of the machine that kind of pushes the filament through the hot end. It'll push and it pull it as needed depending on how it's sliced. I'll be talking about that process later. And for it to be built, it needs to be on top of a print bed. So that print bed is actually heated as well. It's to help with the bonding for the bottom part of the 3D printer. It's also known as a build plate. One thing to note is the limitation of 3D printing is size. So if your 3D printer has a big bed, you could make bigger builds. But if it's a smaller one, you're kind of confined to whatever size you're able to pull off on that. In some cases, you might have to break off the build into parts and then glue it together to make the one bigger part that you would have if you had a bigger bed. So there's steps to 3D printing that we're going to be going over. I'm going to be breaking each one of these down, but to sum it up, it's first you have to get a printer. Many of you already have these printers, some of you don't. So this will be a good time to kind of know where you're going to start once you do get a printer. Once you have the printer, you have to find digital design or a design. You're going to use slicing software to create a G code of the digital file. You've got to load up the digital file into the printer. Once it's there, you're going to print it. So locating a printer, like we found out in the chat, public libraries, great place to start 3D printing. A lot of libraries do have them. So when the youth comes in, they're like, hey, where can I 3D print? And if your library doesn't have one, you really could run a public search on Google Maps, public library, happen to call one up, they might have a 3D printer available. Other places you might find them are universities, schools. You can do one specialty order online, or you could be like me and Dr. Chloe, dipping into our own paychecks just to get our own 3D printer so we can start printing our own stuff, for like board games. There's something also called maker spaces. So these are collaborative workspaces where you kind of get to do a whole lot of tactile different stuff. So they have 3D printing services, laser cutting services, CNC machines, soldering irons, and even sewing machines. So if you never heard of maker spaces, definitely try to look it up, and for people who are interested in that sort of thing. So when we're finding a digital design, there's file types you have to be aware of, and really we're just going to go over the most common ones, which are FTX, STL, and OBJ. Now these files are made for 3D printing, and they are set as a 3D object that you could put into your 3D printer. There's a lot of websites that you could visit. A main one I'm going to point out right now is one called Thingiverse. We do cite a lot of their images in our presentation. So if you happen to see thing and then the number, you just put in that number into a Thingiverse search and out will pop the item that you're looking for. There's also other websites like Yeti, Printable with 3D Ship, Colts 3D, Free 3D. A lot of these websites do the same exact thing. The thing is, not every website will have the same thing. So because it's community based, you're going to find different items on different websites. The video does not work. However, if you search Braille on Thingiverse, you'll find stuff like some of it's pictured right here, like a D20 dice with Braille on it, a Braille learning board, there's a Braille Rubik's Cube. There's other stuff, if you search it in Thingiverse, you'll find stuff like a Braille card, a cipher disk for Braille, and also there's actually a really interesting one, a Braille library card. That would be useful, right? So the other search would be assistive. There's stuff in that image on your right. There's an adjustable bottle cap opener, plastic cap wrench. There's an assistive device for assistance dogs, bag carrier, assistive padded grips. Really, there's even other smaller things like a nail clipper holder, a signature guide so that it keeps your signature when in a box, and palm pen holders. And this is all useful for someone who may have Parkinson's and they need this kind of assistive device. So there is one important website I would like to mention, and it has a lot to do with inclusivity and wellness. There's a website called Makers Making Change, and it's found at makersmakingchange.com that specializes in do-it-yourself assistive technology. So they're a website with an open source design, but really what makes them stand out from the rest of the other websites is the community. They have a network of users who can make the request for certain assistive devices based on their needs. And they also have a network of makers who will make efforts to create the 3D printing files based on those requests. So in other words, they match up user requests with makers who can help make them. There's many different assistive devices that they have, one of which is this assistive switch that you see on the bottom left of this slide. If you're not sure what they are, they're assistive switches. They're for someone who has less motor function. So they might not have the fine motor control to be able to do something. So they could just hit the switch with their hand and it'll help them accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. They're created so you could hit the switch for an action to happen. Dr. Chloe will be talking a lot more about inclusivity and wellness a little bit later in the presentation. 3D modeling programs. So this is a list of programs that will help you design a 3D image. There's stuff like Fusion 360, Tinkercad, Blender, OpenSCAD, FreeCAD, Ultimaker Cura. You're going to see CAD a lot, and that's because CAD actually stands for Computer Aided Design. It's the use of computer-based software to help in the design process of creating a 3D object. Tinkercad is one of them. It helps for really putting all these three-dimensional shapes together, so it makes a file that you can 3D print a little bit later on. Now, we looked on Reddit, and there was a poll on Reddit where almost 2,000 people responded with Fusion 360 as their 3D modeling software of choice. With that said, Fusion 360 is a little bit more advanced. Tinkercad was the other option, and really Tinkercad is probably the better option if you're just getting started and you want to get your feet wet into designing your own 3D image. So like I said earlier, Tinkercad, free web app for 3D design. It helps you code. This really is a friendly design space that offers resources and training videos for kids to learn how to design to print, which is why we're suggesting that you go with 3D CAD for this one. There's also a 3D printing lesson plans that can serve you to learn how to 3D print at your own library. So this is definitely something you should check out and show to youth in case they're interested in 3D printing. So you have to use slicing software. After you have a 3D object file, that's not exactly ready to print. Once you have a file, you need to slice it. So slicing software, what it'll do is take that 3D model or object and it'll break it down into instructions for a G code, which is what a 3D printer understands as its language and commands for what to do so that it could create the object. The video doesn't work, but if we were to play it, it will actually show it layer by layer. So I actually have an object with me. This is what it looks like when it's halfway built. So what happens is the slicer would have just shown about like the bottom part, and you can move it up and down, so it'll take you through the steps of it. If you're familiar with using the print preview page on a Word document, this is print preview for a 3D object. So you would think that as soon as you got this file, you could load it up into the printer and then print. Unfortunately, for most of us that have been through this, it's really not that simple. Our first print is usually not the best one, and a whole lot of it tends to be trial and error. So when we print, there's some calibration issues. Sometimes the bed is not straight, the temperatures are not correct. But really, once you figure it out, the whole thing just kind of falls into place. And usually when you find the settings that work for you, it'll more or less be that same setting. And once you get it, it'll be easier to print. So then you just go through the cycle of designing an object, printing an object, fixing it, repeating it, and then eventually you get it perfect. So there's some considerations you might want to think about when do you try to come up and be like, oh, I want to 3D print this. You have to think about, is it worth it economically, and really is it practical to do so? Like, for example, we're probably not going to be printing our first car at our library. And one question you might ask the youth is it worth printing, and is it worth designing it? Would it be cheaper to buy a mug online on Amazon? Or would it be better to 3D print a mug that might not even hold up to the hot temperatures and that's not even food friendly? So just be aware that you are a library. There are websites that do have unique and educational items. It is open source, but there's going to be some in that same exact search on that website where others are just not safe for work or for children. So really, it will be up to your discretion to monitor what a student searches. So from here, I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Dr. Chloe. She's going to start talking about fostering inclusivity and wellness.
All right, MJ, great job. Thanks. So I get really excited about 3D printing and the idea of it being a tool to be able to expose youth to accessibility, diversity, and inclusion. Seems like a really good opportunity. So I'm excited to share this with you. And I want to let you know that these are just some ideas that I have and that MJ and I have come up together with. And really, the opportunities are endless for you and your library and the context in which you work with your youth, since I'm not sure exactly how that works on y'all's side. But like I said, I think this is a really good opportunity to teach concepts of accessibility, inclusivity, and diversity. Exposing a student to an adapted ball pen can show that different types of individuals with different abilities and different motor skills can indeed write. And so instead of assuming that their peer in a wheelchair who might appear to have little motor function could not write or could not participate in a coloring activity, this gives them the conceptualization and the tangible tool to be able to see how, with adaptation and modification, really anyone can learn and anyone can access the world. And so I think this might be a really good opportunity for you all to encourage youth to build partnerships with their family or a friend or maybe their class or a community organization in considering what a need might be, and then designing a print or a project for that population, friend, family, or peer, to then consider different ways of accessibility and inclusivity. As MJ said, it's really important that you consider the practicality and feasibility. So you might have a young kid that comes in that has a friend in a wheelchair and they want to print them a new wheelchair, but that really isn't going to be practical or feasible for the limitations of strength and actual function. So it will be important when working with youth to kind of keep the bounds of what is realistic, because for my personal experience, my ideas go everywhere and then I kind of have to wind myself back in and go, okay, what is realistic? What can I actually do? So we're going to share some ideas we came up with you about ways you could engage youth. So I thought of disability awareness campaigns, different assistive devices you can print. Braille materials is obviously going to be very applicable at your libraries. Augmentative and alternative communication devices, so AAC devices, sensory integration, or even tabletop activities. I love this little learning brain on the right side. I had a professor I printed it for. He used to joke about his brain, and so I printed him a new one. So you can also, of course, use prints as inside jokes. So first thing I thought about was disability awareness campaigns. So it's important that we're creating awareness and acceptance for diversity in the world. Different prints can bring different awareness. So things like Braille can bring awareness to individuals with visual impairments. Different assistive devices can show, like I said, awareness that just because someone may have a different motor ability doesn't mean they can't access the world. And so I was thinking, at a library, you could print for the specific populations to create awareness. You could print awareness swag to be able to give out, or even awareness swag for tabletop decorations. So July is Disability Pride Month, and it might be a really great opportunity for you to build, an assistive device library for your youth to be able to come and interact with. So here I have just a small summary of this calendar, which I'll go ahead and put in the chat. So this is a calendar that talks about disability awareness months and dates. So you can see in January, there's Braille Literacy Month. Might be a really good opportunity for you to print some of these Braille models to be able to highlight that. In April, you have Autism Acceptance Month. You might be able to print some of the different communication devices or even tactile fidgets for your population with students with autism. All sorts of opportunities. I encourage you to go ahead and check out that link. There is a downloadable, exhaustive list of the different awareness days and months with the link to the organization to be able to find more information if you are interested in holding an awareness campaign at your library. So assistive devices, like I said, this is one of the first places that got me interested in 3D printing. So assistive devices are ways to enhance accessibility for anyone. So it doesn't have to be someone who is diagnosed with a disability. This might be anybody. This includes things like wheelchair accessories, different educational devices, gaming accessories, press switches, different aids for ADLs or your activities of daily life. So door pulls, zipper pulls, writing supports, openers, or exercise equipment. I'm not sure, I know my video is tiny on mine, so you might not be able to see it, but this is a great example of a pen holder that can be printed from Makers Making Change that someone with maybe fine motor or grip deficit would be able to then use to write. And so you could print these to have them available at your library so that if you have a youth or even adult come in with different motor ability, they would be able to access with the assistive technology you have ready for them. So there are different wheelchair accessories. I absolutely love this wheelchair mounted dog treat dispenser. Whoever made this had a brilliant idea. I love dogs. So thinking about different ways for individuals to be able to access the social engagement around them. This is something you can find on Makers Making Change. This ramp for a one-step you can find on Thingiverse. I think MJ found online these ramps can cost upwards of like $70. So there's all of these different devices you might be able to print. And of course, number one you have to consider is one, practical, and two, well, probably one is safety, but making sure that whatever you print is safe before you're letting someone use it. So some search terms that you can find these under are assistive devices, assistive tech, assistive technology, occupational therapy, physical therapy, wheelchair accessory, wheelchair device. They're all, I would say, kind of hidden. I haven't been able to find all of the assistive technology or disability awareness materials just by searching one word. It has definitely taken time and multiple searches across multiple websites to be able to see all of the options that are available. So I encourage you all to poke around. And like MJ did say, 3D printing is this open source community, is really valued within the 3D printing community, which means we share our materials and our designs openly. So someone could then download and alter that design to their own specificity. So that means, if this pen holding grip was not the right size, I would be able to alter it to the correct size for the user. Same thing goes with anything that might include wheelchair accessories. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was assistive devices with education. So we talked about Makers Making Change. They have this pre-designed downloadable kit of educational devices. And so that includes a bottle opener, a dice spinner, a key turner, a switch, palm pen holder, the pen ball, and then a reading bar. And I think the reading bar is definitely applicable to you all. I know we could always use, rulers and whatnot, but this might be something that you could print out and have as a surplus for children who come to your library, or even adults who experience dyslexia. And having those available would then, right, enhance people's access to reading, which is so important. Instead of them having to request accommodation, you can have it ready and available for your guests. So gaming is another big thing within 3D printing. One thing I see online are these adapted controllers. One is the one-handed controller. So you might have a student or a librarian, I don't know what you call your attendants who come to the library, clients maybe, or guests. Who come to the library, patrons, that's a good word, Amy, thank you, who uses one hand to function throughout the world. And you might encourage them to consider some devices they could print for themselves to access what they like. And so this one-handed Xbox controller you can see is available for download on Makers Making Change. This might also just be a project you print with a student to create awareness of the different motor abilities in the world. I'm not sure if you guys have gaming stations. You might even print and have available a one-handed controller for kids to play with to see that they are able to play games with one hand. Yeah, cool. So then assistive switches are really expensive. When it comes to that disability tax I was talking about, a lot of the time, one of the barriers to be able to access equipment and assistive devices that will then support someone's interaction with the world is the cost. And so these press switches are something that we often find a barrier. They can cost upwards of $150. However, Makers Making Change and all over Thingiverse and the other websites are these pre-designed assistive switches that can be downloaded and printed. And then on Makers Making Change, they provide the information on how to then integrate the technology and wiring within it to make it work. So on the right, you can see the Switch adapted Peppa Pig toy. So someone with a limited motor function would be able to press that button and be able to interact with that toy. And I think it's really cool to be able to see how just a little item like that can allow for someone who is in a wheelchair or who has that motor deficit to be able to interact with the world like their peers are. Other things are these activities of daily living. So we've talked several times about these pen and pencil holders. There are bag carriers and bottle openers, even key turners. And there's the signature guide and then a tube opener, which would be like to open toothpaste tubes. And so all of these might be something that you print out that you have readily available to show diversity in the world to patrons who come to your library. So I could see, you guys having, of course, the pen holders ready and those reading lines available. And maybe you just have an area where you have 3D printed assistive technology to show off that different tools that can help people of different abilities access the world. Fitness, of course, is something I'm always going to plug as a kinesiology person. So for me, this adapted bike pedal really holds a strong place in my heart because it kind of represents that barrier I experienced in undergrad trying to provide access to physical activity for my dad. There are things like dumbbell fat grips that if someone had a harder time with fine motor function or grip strength, they'd be able to work out with a barbell because of that larger grip. There's fitness dice. You could also print lightweight equipment, like printing out a tennis racket. It seems silly because you would think, oh, that's going to break. But that might allow a child with limited motor function to be able to play tennis with a balloon that wouldn't break that racket because it's lightweight and shaped to a size that they can then hold. So again, the opportunities are really endless. This is one of my favorite Braille and tactile models. I saw on y'all's website that there's the Kentucky Talking Book Library, and I'm not sure the extent of what that is, but I do know that through Braille 3D print, you might be able to expand this option. And so you could offer learning materials that are 3D printed Braille, books, board games, signage, or labeled diagrams. So I really encourage you to check out what is available in your library related to Braille and see how you could extend those options for your patrons. So learning Braille might be an introductory lesson for maybe younger youth, or if you wanted to do a multi-step series about Braille with a kind of workshop with youth, that might be a great place to start. So you could have a Braille learning board and the Braille Zoo book that I talked about earlier. So I think a middle school designed this. This is on Thingiverse, but it's Dear Zoo, and it goes through the different animals, which are then labeled with Braille, and also have these tactile animals lifted off the page so that someone with a visual impairment could then feel that tactile animal and kind of see what the shape would be like. So that might be the start of introducing your youth to Braille. And then you might advance it to them creating Braille. So you could provide creating Braille kits, which might include that learning board, Braille letter tiles, and a slate and stylus for them to create their own Braille. So you can print out these Braille letter tiles and then different labels all over your library, or you can teach them how to create Braille themselves once they understand what Braille is. And then to extend upon that, you might start to investigate the accessibility of your library. So you might take your youth on a scavenger hunt or a guided tour to start looking at the signage and looking at, is your signage actually accessible? Is someone with a visual impairment, one, going to be able to locate that signage, and two, be able to find the Braille? If the Braille doesn't exist, then it's a place for you to go ahead and create a project to create more Braille signage throughout your library. So I thought this was really cool. Eastern Illinois University made this tactile Braille labeled map of their library, of the Booth Library. So you can see above, there's a picture of the map of their library, and then below, doesn't show great, but it's a Braille labeled map, which has Braille labels on each of their stacks to show where different items are. So you could also apply this to things outside of the library. For me, I find this really cool. This is a goalball court. Goalball is a para sport played in the Paralympics for people with visual impairments. The objective of the game is to throw the ball across the court and score in the goal on the other side. For athletes with visual impairments to be introduced to an activity, there's an even greater barrier to understand what the court or the game logistics are going to be like. And so by pre-teaching our students with visual impairments about physical activities for them to be able to orient and navigate around a space is really important. And so I think one of the projects I'm going to move forward with is creating a library of Braille labeled tactile sport courts. But you know, new faculty, everything is to come. So this is another great option if you want to give projects to your youth or even work on a project yourself. So then there are the tactile models with Braille labeling, and there's a lot of these available in education. So different disciplines like health and anatomy, biology, chemistry, math, and physics. Here on the left side, you can see a Braille periodic table, which is Braille labeled elements, and the height of those elements represents the density of those elements. On the right side, this is a great tool to show accessibility and different ways people access the world. So this is has sign language symbols and Braille for each of the elements on the periodic table. So you could either look for and create a library of the existing items, or you could even go through and create Braille labeled educational items for your library yourself. Another option might be within math, where you could print this tactile Braille ruler, or even the fraction learning kit with Braille labels. I think the fraction learning kit could benefit any student really, because fractions are hard to learn, and to be able to have this physical item like we do in our math classes can really support that learning with the tangible visualization of what fractions are. So then MJ and one of our favorites are these 3D printed anatomical models. So anatomical models are ridiculously expensive. I know that at my undergrad university, we could check out anatomical models. I'm not sure if that's something that's available at public libraries, but it's something that you might be able to offer by 3D printing your own anatomical library. So one of my favorite prints is this heart right here. I just printed this out this weekend in a rainbow filament because I thought it would be pretty to have a rainbow heart. And it really shows the details with the aorta and the ventricles and all of the different anatomy within the heart that you could teach. So this isn't only going to benefit our seeing patrons, it's also going to benefit someone with a visual impairment who then is learning about the heart and can feel the different areas of the heart to really understand the concepts of that anatomy. So I talked a little bit about AAC devices. AAC devices are a way that individuals communicate. And so you can see here on the right side, there's key guards for the AAC app. You might wonder why you would need key guards. If you're an individual who might not have the fine motor control to then move your finger from one place to a key, it might be necessary for you to have a border along those keys so that when you went to press the specific key, you weren't hitting all of the different keys. You were able to aim for that general location and end up inside that border. So you might have patrons who come who use AAC devices who could benefit from something like this. You might also print a ball stylus, which would allow someone who might not have the ability to point or might have the ability to have the grip on a ball, be able to then put input into a tablet or their AAC device. Another great option are these picture exchange communication. In education, we call these PECs. And so this is communication support. A lot of the time, these will be little symbols like break or water or snack or recess, any type of communication that a student might need. We print out with PECs so that we can support their communication. So we use these with children with autism, with intellectual disabilities, really anyone who might need support with communication. So you might print out tactile emotion cards that you could have your patrons let you know what emotion they're feeling in the moment when they enter your library so that you can meet them where they're at. You also have the ability to print this desktop schedule, which is good for really anybody. I personally love schedules and love routine, but it's especially going to help our kids with autism to understand what the routine might be. So here, there's the time at which the time it's going to occur, and then the task little card can be moved over and slipped down where you see those little diamonds to show that it's all done. So sensory integration, like MJ talked about, we love fidgets. We love being able to print fidgets. These are really great tools to be able to, one, print because it's something that kids love. They have a lot of fun playing with them. And because there's so many fidget toys available on open source websites, they can really find something they're interested in. So you've seen the giraffe throughout. I love giraffes. My brother printed me that giraffe you're seeing, and that's called a flexi. And so it's an articulated shape with hinges in it that can then move. There's other things like MJ had shown his joystick fidget that clicks. Students could design their own fidgets. The flexi, there's the articulated hinge. You can download that from Thingiverse and then apply it to a shape to make your own flexi. But the options there are really limitless. Maybe you want to have flexis or fidget toys on hand so that you can give it to a student who's having a harder time sitting still or attending to whatever workshop or activity you might be doing. But it might be a great library of fidgets that you could build. So then there's tabletop activities. So a lot of the time within PE, we talk about how our students with motor deficits are sat to the side to not be able to interact. But oftentimes some of our kids have tabletops on their wheelchair, or we can provide them a tabletop. And they can engage in that same activity on a miniature form by playing a tabletop activity. So on the left, you can see this tabletop goal, which could be used for tabletop soccer or hockey, or any type of sport that involves a goal. You could crumple up a paper ball to be able to flick towards the goal. On the right, you can see the tabletop bowling setup. I love that this comes with a rolling ramp, because that means that you could place the ball and a student with limited motor ability could just press the ball and be able to engage with bowling. And there's lots of different tabletop activities on the internet that you could print or even design yourself. The next thing is board games. So there is Braille Scrabble online, so you could print out your own Braille Scrabble set to have ready at the library. This again could promote that awareness of disability, because maybe with your already existing Scrabble set, you include the Braille Scrabble, which just might spark someone's interest in understanding that, again, the world is diverse and accessibility can be made in any way or form. There's these card holders to be able to hold your hand of cards for someone who might have limited fine motor ability. This would allow them to either prop that card set up in front of them or hold it with a less of a pincer grab, but instead more of just a clasp of the hand. So I would love to interact with you all now. So I didn't know if we'd be able to use sound. Sounds like you guys can talk to me if you want. In the chat as well, you can put ideas for 3D printed accessibility models or wellness projects or other ideas this might have sparked for you. I think this would be a great time for us all to exchange ideas that might have come up as we presented. So feel free to chime in or go ahead and chat, whatever you prefer. I'm also happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. So what have you all 3D printed for what you have? Who of those of you who have 3D printers, what are some things you're printing for your libraries? I love that idea, Melissa. Yeah, so they could communicate when they're overwhelmed and not have to speak. Yeah, Tori, I am sure those anatomical models would be helpful to your pre-med students. I was a kinesiology undergrad, and when I was in anatomy, it was like trying to get your hands on the arm and leg models to be able to study the intricacies was so hard, because there was one model at our university for each of those. So we were always like, get there early enough so you can get the model. But if those were available at other locations, that could really help those students.
I hate to say this, but we need to start wrapping up, Chloe and
Okay.
everybody. I'm so sorry.
No, do not be
Please,
sorry. So
please continue commenting to the things in the chat. But yeah, I just wanted to point, catch your attention.
I appreciate the help with time management. I get excited and carried away.
Well, I don't want to end it.
Yeah, I love that. You could do a little tutorial for them to pick something and print it and learn about this. Thanks for sharing, Sarah. So here are some resources. We talked a lot about Makers Making Change, and Thingiverse is a place I get a lot of my prints. An exhaustive list of disability awareness calendar is available at that link. If you're interested in a reading support, I published an article on 3D printing and adapted physical education in 2021 that you could access. But besides that, thank you so much. My email's in the chat if you want to reach out. I really appreciate your time. And let me know if you have any questions in these last few minutes.
And that article that Chloe just mentioned about designing inclusion was actually how I found her. I read that article and tracked her down. So I highly recommend that article if you're at all interested in anything too that was said today, because it expounds on certain areas that are wonderful.
Thank you all. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. And our next session starts at 2. So get up, or 1 o'clock Central Time. Get up and stretch your arms, get a drink, and come on back. Don't leave us. And thank you all.
Thank you so much for having us, Amy.